Hi, welcome again to the Ivory Tower Collections. Today's video is going to be hopefully a quick little tech video to show you. And specifically, we're going to talk about a couple of different things. Well, we're going to talk about one thing mainly. It's going to involve the Sega Genesis again. Now, the Sega Genesis, there has been a modification that's been available for actually many, many years, but it's not done very often. And basically, it looks something like this. What is this? Well, this is a modification that I have performed on several Genesis systems for people, including most of my own. And basically what it entails is utilizing a Yamaha YM3438 FM synthesizer chip and piggybacking it on top of the original 2612 synthesizer that comes in a Model 1 Sega Genesis. Now you might be thinking, what? Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons, but again, I will admit first off that the modification for this is very subjective as far as how the audio sounds to people. I think it sounds better. I prefer the way it sounds, but not everybody does. So, you know, it is, I guess you could say, somewhat controversial in that regard. But anyway, so basically the mod has us take a arcade quality FM synthesizer chip, the YM3438, which was not used in home consoles or most consumer electronics, so they're not exactly common. You have to get these off of eBay or other places like that from China, Japan, what have you. And so the basic mod would require taking one of these chips, desoldering or removing the 2612 synthesizer that comes on the Genesis, and then you piggyback the two on top of each other and you solder all the pins down that you need to. You cut a few pins that aren't required and can cause interference and problems between the two chips. Some other things, you have to add some capacitors and some resistors off the 3438 to filter it further because it is much louder as far as the audio output amplitude from it compared to the standard 2612. And that was it. So that was the basic mod to put in. Now, the reason for what I'm about to show you is because while this is fine and dandy, not everybody may like the way that this sounds. And if they acquire or do this modification on their Genesis and then decide they want to go back to the original 2612, well, you're kind of in a pickle. It's not the easiest thing to desolder these two chips apart again. And if, assuming that the person who did the modification didn't cut the output pins coming off the original 2612, they may not be present anymore, and you may not actually be able to use the 2612 that's on here anymore, at least not by itself. And also with all the extra solder and everything on it, it would just be kind of a mess to get it back in place. It's just a hassle. So Firebrandx, who I also talked about in the last video I did where I featured his audio bypass board, has come up with a solution. And it is this. It is called the M1 Double Mega. It's kind of a cool name. In a nutshell, what this is a PCB board that's already got the necessary circuitry filtering in place that allows us to install the 2612 and the 3438 without having to modify the chips in any way, shape, or form by installing them into two separate sockets and providing us with something else we didn't have, a toggle switch to flip between the two synthesizer chips on the fly while the system is on. You don't even have to reset it between flipping between the two chips. So let's talk about what comes in the kit. Now, for Firebrandx, who sells these, hasn't started to offer these just yet. I've got one of the early made boards for this project. It's his latest and hopeful final design of this board. But he does hope to start offering these for people that want it. So let's talk about what the basic kit includes. Of course, you get the M1 Double Mega itself, like you see here. It will already have all of the necessary components soldered onto it, so you won't have to worry about these small SMD components or surface mount devices that are attached. He'll also already have the sockets for the 3438 and the 2612 attached as well. Additionally, it will have two wire leads coming off of it that also have small pins already attached and soldered to the ends. These are going to be the new output lines for the left and right audio. That, again, these are basically tied to the selector switch here that allows you to switch between the two synthesizers. And then the M1 Double Mega also has large standoff pins already soldered in and in place, and this in turn will basically plug in place of where the 2612 used to reside. Notice I said used to reside. So already you kind of get a clue of what's going to be involved here just in the components. So this is the basic board. You will also get a replacement 24-pin socket This will actually install on the main board in place of where the 2612 was, because this modification or installation of this mod board does require removing the original 2612. He'll actually have it either in foam to protect it, or like in this case here, he sent it to me with yet another socket that it's folded into, but then all these pins are bent up and flattened to protect the pins of the top socket. And then finally, he'll also include the 3438 YM synthesizer chip itself, because of course this isn't something that everybody's just going to have laying around. So you would either have to purchase this separately and use it, or what have you. That's the basic kit. There's really not any additional wires or anything like that that are necessary, because he's already got everything, you know, pretty much you need right here on the PCB ready to go. It's just a matter of just popping the chips on where they need to go here, putting in the socket where it needs to go, and getting everything all wired up. So that's the basic kit. So let's get to it. So to simplify this process, I've already disassembled most of the stuff inside this Genesis, or at least I've taken the screws off the case. I still have to do some other stuff as well. But again, this modification is for the Model 1 Genesis, and really specifically it's for the high definition graphic models like you see listed up here. But really this is this mod could be applied to any variant of the Model 1, from the VA2 up to roughly the VA6, 5, 6, 8. The VA7, which is also in this case, does not feature a discrete 2612 synthesizer chip in it to do this mod with, so it's not possible with that particular one. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and disassemble, take this thing apart, and show you where we're going to be working on it. So I've got this Genesis taken apart, and I've got the RF shield, the top RF shield, removed, and the area of focus is going to be right here. This is the main YM2612 synthesizer chip that's in the Sega Genesis Model 1. What's going to be required to install the Double Mega board right here into this is I'm going to have to desolder the 2612 from off of the main board and then replace it with a 24-pin socket here. So that's going to be the next step. So having said that, it's very important that you feel comfortable with desoldering IC chips from off of a main board before attempting this modification yourself. It's really not too big a deal, and the 2612 is a pretty robust chip. It's got large pins, so they're not really finite and close together. It's a through-hole dip IC, so that makes it easy to get to the pins from the back side. So obviously you can use, you know, desoldering braid or a handheld desoldering pump, or my preferred preference is, of course, my FR300 Heiko here. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get this chip removed, and we'll go from there. Okay, now you might be asking yourself why I added solder to these pins if I'm just going to remove this IC chip. Well, the truth is, adding a fresh coat of solder, and in addition, if you saw, I sort of pushed the pins off to the side as I apply the solder. That's to make sure that a fresh batch of solder, as well as loosening up the pins, is already applied through the vias on the PCB to make it easier when I need to desolder, which I'm getting ready to do right now. All right. See if that's any better. Oh yeah. Okay, I think we are loose. We are loose. Do a quick inspection of the chip. Make sure all the pins are intact. And they are. And that's important because we're going to end up having to reuse this, of course, because it's going to go back into that replacement PCB board. So now I can set this off to the side. Okay, next thing to do is to examine the socket itself and to make sure that all of the holes are cleaned up and that there's no additional old residue and flux left behind that can just gummy up the works. And as you can see, this is kind of what was hanging me up here. There's actually this brownish crud right here, and that's actually old dried up flux. So I can just kind of wipe that off with my fingers. So what I'm going to do on that is I'm just going to get a Q-tip and some high quality IPA. I use some 99.9% alcohol for that, and clean off those pins. I'll do it on both the top side of the PCB and the bottom side just to make sure. Okay, that looks better. I think we're golden now. Now what we need to do is just to install the replacement socket in place of where the 2612 used to be. So I'm going to pop that loose out of its protective housing here. There we go. Now the socket, just like an IC chip, will have a notch on one side to indicate where pin 1's location was. Although it's not critical, I guess, it would be, I would say you need to follow the notch along with the notch on the silk screen that was originally in place, just to make it easier going forward where the chip's orientation needs to be in regards to where pin 1 is. So in this particular case, the notch on this socket is just right here on this edge. It's kind of hard to see in the camera, I'm sure. And on the silk screen of the board, it's very easy to see where the notch is. It's right here. So this would indicate here that pin 1 was located right here behind this, there we go, right there. So all I have to do is just get this new socket and orientate it the same way. And just kind of push it into the openings, just like that. So now I've got a new socket in place. All I'll have to do is just solder this down from the other side. Okay, I've got the corners tacked down. Now I'm going to put a little bit of flux around the rest of the pins, make it easier for that solder to adhere. All right, looking good. Now I'll just need to clean off this around the pins on this a little bit to get some of that flux off. And the socket's in place, good to go, ready to receive the rest of the work. At this point in time, we're going to go ahead and reseat the 2612 that I just removed off the Genesis, as well as the 3438 chip, and we're going to insert them into the sockets on the Double Mega board here. So let's see, the easiest way, and it's definitely easier to do this before you try to attach this back onto the Genesis, of course, so I would advise doing it before then. Now, just like everything else, the sockets do have notches in them. So here's the notch up here for the 3438. Here's the notch here for the 2612. So this indicates pin 1 here and pin 1 here for the 3438. I just happen to have my 3438 chip in hand here first, so I'm going to insert it into the socket. Now, because of the odd shape of this, it might almost be easier if you have some sort of a hard surface that you might be able to put part of the PCB on to lay it down flat as you seat the socket or seat the chip back into the socket. So let's see if I have something I might be able to use. I would recommend something like a block of wood or something to that effect. I think what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to do this slightly off camera and do this on the edge of my workbench. That's probably the easiest for me right now. Okay, my 3438's in place. No problem, popped right in. Now, to get the 2612 installed. Now, on the 2612, since you did remove it off the PCB, you want to double check all the pins and make sure that there's not big globs of solder still stuck to them from when you removed it. You really want those pins to try to be as flat as possible. It's one of the reasons why I like to use my desoldering iron, because it does a really good job at getting all that solder off of there, to be honest. These pins actually look pretty good already. I don't think there's much I need to do on these at all, to be honest. They don't look like they're bent out of shape, obviously, or anything like that. So I think I'm good here. So I'm going to go ahead and seat the original 2612 into the socket as well. Now this one orients a little differently. Again, the notch is down here, and the 2612 does not have a noticeable notch on the chip. But what it does have is it's got an indentation right here in this corner. You can't see that, I apologize. So the 2612 does not have a notch on the chip, but it does have an indentation in the corner of it right here, and this denotes where the pin 1 location would be. So basically this notch that's in the top of the ceramic mask is essentially, or the plastic casing in this case, is basically your notch. So here's the Double Mega. 2612 goes here. The notch for it is located right here, so this is pin 1. So the 2612 will seat in this orientation. So I start with the pins in one side of the sockets and make sure they're all lined up. And then again, I would recommend using a flat surface, but I think I'll be okay if I just carefully use my hands here. There we go. Yeah, I just popped right in. No problem at all. So both chips are in, and we are ready to finish up this installation. I have the main board of the Genesis here again, and what I need to do now is, with the parts assembled on the Double Mega here, as far as the two IC chips, what I need to do now is take these two output pins, and I need to go ahead and preemptively snap them into the sockets first. Now that's going to be a little bit tricky, but I think I can do it. There's enough wire here that you should have plenty of clearance to be able to do this. Now it does matter which way you put them in, so that's important, and I've already checked out the pinouts on this to make sure. But the white wire color, the white colored wire here, basically goes in place of pin 21 right here, and the red wire goes into the location where pin 20 used to be. So with that in mind, I'm going to just set the Double Mega off over here for a second. Okay, get my wires moved off to the side a little bit. There we go. So, took a little bit of doing, but I got them in there. Now to get the rest of the double mega board, rotate it around and line up the rest of the wires and pins for that, and you'll know you're in the right sockets because those two audio output wires, go in place of where there's some pins missing from the double mega, and it installs right into the socket that we popped in earlier, just like that. Okay, double mega's in place. And again, you can use your selector switch between whichever synthesizer chip you want to listen to. Down, in this case, is the 3438, and up, I believe, should be the 2612. In fact, I know it is. I already measured it out and with my multimeter earlier to make sure. So, last step is to essentially put the board and everything back into place. Now, it's important to remember that before you put all this back together, you are going to have to remove one of the support bosses inside of the Genesis top shell, inside of the top case. This boss right here, that's directly behind the power switch, is going to have to be removed. Now, technically, you only need to remove it about halfway, but since nothing actually screws into this physically and it's just a support, you could completely remove it if you're able to. Now, there's a couple ways to do that. Probably the easiest way is just to use something like a Dremel or something like that. What I'm going to try to do here is I am going to use my wire cutters, if I can find them, my larger wire cutters like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the support frame or the support fins off that boss post first. And I'm going to try to cut them as close to the bottom of the plastic as I can. Okay. All the support fins are off. So there's not really a whole lot left to hold this in place. So we'll see if we can get this boss removed. There we go. Yeah, it made a nice scary pop, didn't it? But there's no damage to the case. It's not cut directly flush with the case. It didn't break off, right up on it. But definitely got enough of that removed that it's not a problem. That is out of the way. And to make sure it didn't cause any structural stressing on the top, looks fine. All right, at this point, I'm ready to get the board put back into the main case. All right. Good to go. I'm going to put this thing back together and we're pretty much done. Now, obviously, at the end of this video, I will put a couple of quick sound sample demos between the two chips, and I'll be able to flip it on and off in real time so that you'll be able to see that. So yeah, we'll check that out now.